I think first we establish principles. These are what I think the principles should be. The American people should be able to hold those to whom they loan power, incumbents, accountable. And the bias of the system should be toward power back home rather than power in Washington. Lobbying is an honorable and legitimate function, but it should be transparent and accountable. Middle-class candidates should be able to challenge incumbents and millionaires with adequate resources raised from their own constituency. Foreign influence buying is potentially fatal to our system of government and has to be tightly scrutinized and monitored. And Americans should expect the majority of the House and Senate to put the country first and to restrain or defeat those efforts at personal aggrandizement and personal power which undermine the effectiveness and the legitimacy of the government. Here are some specific steps. I hope, starting at the end of this month, that the House and Senate leadership will announce a series of hearings. They will look at the entire system, not just try to narrow it down, and that they'll be honest about holding hearings on the total scale of reform we need. Here are some suggestions. 1, abolish fundraising in Washington. There's no reason for incumbents to raise money in the Capitol. The Capitol exists because it's paid for by taxpayers. So why would you have a system where you send somebody to Washington to raise money to block you from ever defeating them? And I mean this quite literally. The number of state capitals that do this, you can't raise money while the legislature's in session. If you did that, by the way, you'd have much shorter congressional session. 2, allow unlimited contributions by citizens in the congressional district of a House race or in the state of a Senate race. Why would you have any limitation on citizens banding together to defeat an incumbent? Isn't that an absolute violation of the First Amendment, that there will be no limits to free speech? And particularly, why would you stop people in a congressional district from spending? Remember, we have a system now where you can buy a governorship, you can buy a Senate seat as long as you're personally rich. You can use the taxpayers' money and the taxpayers' staff and the taxpayers' franking privileges and the taxpayers giving you enough cash to have pork barrel deals, and you can win re-election as an incumbent by 96% margins. So clearly the system is much too biased in favor of incumbents. So why not, as a first step towards a freer society, allow people to give any amount they want in their home congressional seat or in their home state for campaigns in that place? And you would overnight increase the level of competition in this country. Overnight. But people in Washington would be very uncomfortable. 3rd, require that all lobbying contacts between government officials, elected and unelected, and lobbyists, be posted on the internet weekly so people can understand who is doing what. And I'd have them posted in a dual manner. That is, the lobbyist has to post them every week, and the government officials have to post them every week. So they better match up. 4th, require all foreign monies being used to influence government to be reported and posted on the internet so there is one center of information about the flow of cash. I believe it will stun people to learn how many foreign entities now seek to influence the U.S. with money. 5, establish a back-home standard of honesty and expectations. If you can't explain it back home without lying, then it is wrong. You know, Rotary has a phrase, service before self. Service before self is a pretty good standard, even in Washington. And if you have to pretend something is charitable when it is clearly personal, it is wrong. You know, Washington will presently get caught up in sophisticated, complicated self-analysis when the facts are pretty simple. People did the wrong things, and they should not be allowed to get away with it. My mother said to me many years ago that I was explaining some complicated Washington scheme. I think I was a freshman at the time. And she said to me, "That is dumb." And I thought she had wonderfully cut through to reality in a startling way. And so maybe Jack Abramoff is finally bad enough, and the story will be big enough that when things are dumb, we can simply go around and say they're dumb. I have 2 last reforms. End the Senate hold system on presidential appointments and eliminate the arrogance of individual senators blackmailing the President of the United States over extraneous issues with the compliance of their colleagues in what is in effect a mugging of the executive branch and a major contribution to the arrogance of power in the Senate. That could be done by Senate rule at the end of this month. And finally, shrink the size of the federal government and move power out of Washington and back to 50 states, 3,300 counties, and even more importantly, the American people. Don't kid yourself. As long as we spend $2.5 trillion in this city, and as long as this city sets regulations for every aspect of life, people are going to spend enormous amounts to influence a system that big. If you want to preserve your constitutional liberties, you want an effective, strong, but limited government. And that means, I think, some serious consideration about just how many things we should be deciding in Washington and how many things we ought to be returning back home for other people to decide.